Okay.
She didn't really want to be first anyway.
Hey, ordered my pizza, by the way, for 8:30. Okay, sorry.
Okay, we'll say that.
You can say that.
Pizza. You wanna say a few words? No. No, you sure?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. All right, we're almost ready. Well, so thank you for coming, everyone. My name is Stefano. I run Token Economy together with my friend Yannick. It's a weekly newsletter, which if you're not subscribed to, you should. And I wanted to say a quick thank you to Blue Yard, obviously, for pizza, drinks, and plays. The news is that there's more pizza coming at 8:30, so you can clap for that. And obviously to Centrifuge for putting together the panel and this event. So we will be joined by a great panel talking about sustainability. Sustainability is obviously a very loaded term, which can kind of come to mean many different things. And tonight we're going to try to tackle all of them and see how the blockchain ties into that. So I would like to welcome on stage Jesse from Provenance, founder and CEO. Please. Yeah, those are the seats. Then we have Elisa. She is from Einhorn, and every guest will have 3 to 5 minutes to talk about their company and what they do. And then Franz Born. You say it. Fonseca. I would never say that. Right. So please welcome. And then we have Max from Centrifuge. So yeah, we're gonna leave 3 to 5 minutes to every guest to tell us about what they're working on and why. And please, Jesse. You have a few slides. You wanna do that? Cool.
A mic. Sorry. Hello. Okay.
It's just for
Is
the
it
live
on?
stream.
Fine. Sorry about that. Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie from Provenance. Has anyone heard of Provenance before? A few people? Nice. Cool. My background is, so actually, it's weird. I'm based in London, and that's where Provenance HQ is, so there's a few of us all over the place. I came to Berlin about 5 years ago to meet with someone that's now my friend, Jutta Steiner, and another guy called Gavin Wood, and they had just met with Vitalik, and they were forming a team here in Berlin to build Ethereum. And so really actually it's here in Berlin where I first got really very excited about blockchain tech. I'd been a bit into Bitcoin before that, but it was here in Berlin, listening to Gavin and Jutta talk about Ethereum, that I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. This is going to change the world. And it's about then that I started thinking about how that technology could be applied. And I started Provenance. At the time, I was doing a full-time PhD in computer science, and Provenance was my side project. Luckily, my PhD was able to look specifically at blockchain tech, and so I decided to put all my energy into looking at how blockchain technology could revolutionize supply chains in order to help make them more sustainable. And I thought the key to that was transparency. Cool. So essentially, at Provenance are slightly strange, isn't it? But hey, there we go. So at Provenance, the vision has been exactly the same since the side project I started it as a long time ago, and that we see a future where every single product comes with information about who made it, where, and from what. So it wasn't that long ago that it used to be pretty hard to find out how much sugar or salt was in a product, for example. But now in the UK, for example, it's mandatory on a packaged product to write exactly how much salt is in that product. And I think that it won't be too long before it becomes mandatory to know the impact of the product you're buying on your body, on the planet, and on society. And so at Provenance, we're here to work with business to help them be voluntarily more transparent, to hopefully adopt that before it becomes regulation, because it may be waiting a long time. And so we are doing that with businesses that are really motivated to serve a new kind of consumer. It's often a millennial consumer, and many of you will be like this. And that's people that want to know more about where products come from and care about society and the environment and want to have a positive impact when they buy things. Sure, we're not all perfect, and I certainly am not either, but increasingly as we're buying stuff online and technology is our mode of operandi to be able to buy stuff, why can't we be more intelligent and buy with impact? So what have we built? So Provenance is now a startup rather than a side project. We made the transition a few years ago, firstly as a research-based team, R&D project funded by mostly grants and government funding. And then a year ago, I decided it was time to turn us into a startup. We're still a social enterprise, but now for profit. So we have a platform that enables businesses to be more voluntarily transparent, so share information about their businesses. And we use blockchain tech to help businesses store proven claims about their products, for example, the carbon footprint or where it's from, and also to track products through supply chains. So just a little bit more about us and our clients and the kind of stage we're at now. So now we are 26 people and mostly working with brands. So usually food and drinks businesses, although we've worked with everything from fashion to furniture. And yeah, our largest clients include people like Unilever, a couple of the retailers in the UK. And then we also work on slightly more experimental projects with those customers. So something that ties into today's panel is we've been working on a few projects that involve linking supply chain transparency and traceability to trade finance. So looking at how we can create more catalysts to creating more transparent and sustainable supply chains. So not just relying on us being good consumers, but seeing whether we can make the money make this engine move faster as well. So thank you very much. Voila.
Yeah, I will keep with that. Because we have a physical product. So I'm Elisa from Einhorn. Do you hear me? Is it?
Yeah, it's just for the live stream.
Okay. So who of you knows Einhorn? Good. So we're doing a good marketing job, at least. Yeah, so we do this wonderful packed condoms, and we have exactly the same vision, even though, like, focusing on one product. But our vision, I will sit down because, I'm pregnant and we do condoms. To avoid the joke from the beginning. That was on purpose. So our vision is we're also a social business and is to unfuck economy, because economy, if you look at like what the problems in the world we have right now, in the end, if you track it down, at some point there's always economy involved. So we thought like, okay, why can't we build an economy which is innovative, which is driving, agile, whatever, but at the same time is treating humans and the environment as it should be and paying the true costs. And then we decided to do condoms. So we started 3 years ago and it's going very, very well. The problem we had with condoms is that, like, in comparison to a lot of other products, with condoms you don't have they're made out of rubber. Rubber comes from trees. But in comparison to other products or to other resources, you don't have fair trade, you don't have organic rubber, because 70% goes to the tire industry, and so far no one, when you buy a car, asks if you have sustainable tires. So that was our beginning, and then we were like, okay, shit, what should we do? So we actually went to the supply chain and got to know all the partners, and I spent 5 months in Malaysia to know the partners, like where's the rubber coming from. We sent in total 6 students to the rubber plantation, which went there every day to know, like, okay, what is really their perspective also on sustainability, because we wanted to integrate their perspective. So 3 years later now, we can say that we we have the 3-tier supply chain. So it's like the rubber plantation, then it's the processor of the rubber, then it's the condom manufacturer, then it comes to us, and then to all the lucky people who have sex. And we managed to, because we thought like, okay, where can we have the biggest impact? Also, like we made, of course, a life cycle analysis. And then we saw like, okay, at the beginning of the value chain, actually the rubber plantations where the workers are, is where we could have the most impact, but it's definitely the worst because we don't have a direct business relationship with them. So we managed to build a sustainability program where the rubber tappers got a premium price throughout the value chain and not just with a direct supplier. And because it's going so well, and our vision is to unfuck economy, we of course want to be like the next fair and sustainable Procter & Gamble. And so we are now focusing on female hygiene products. So since February, I'm focusing on the value chain of pads, panty liners, and tampons, and also cups. But cups, they're already sustainable, and the supply chain is a lot easier. And there we're doing exactly the same, trying to find out, okay, where's actually the cotton coming from? Which impact does the cotton have? How can we make sure that at the beginning of the supply chain, so the cotton farmers, which in our case will be in Tanzania, how can we make sure that they're paid fairly? And we don't use anything with blockchain. I have an idea how this would work. But it's like, okay, we try to build all this without the technology because in my experience, like in the physical product world with production processes and stuff, this is not there yet. So it's really, old-fashioned. And even, I mean, what we do is we go with Instagram. So we take all the customers with Instagram to the rubber plantation or to the cotton farmers, and that is already like super, super new. So I'm happy to hear your ideas on blockchain.
So, thank you so much. My name is Franz von Weizsäcker. I'm from GIZ. GIZ is the German governmental agency for international cooperation and development. It's a pretty large organization, and we are from the government. May I ask who of you is from the government? So not so many hands are rising. I have guessed that, and so in that sense, it's a bit of an untypical thing in this ecosystem. And we're a large organization, 19,000 people, 2.5 billion revenues of euro each year, and projects in 130 countries. And one of them countries being Costa Rica. We have one of our colleagues here right now doing a hospitation in our blockchain lab based in Berlin. So there's 6 people working on the governance frameworks around crypto, let's say crypto solutions. The governance frameworks meaning the legal environment, the institutional environment, the economic mechanism, the incentive systems around it, and basically anything that enables crypto solutions to work for our business, which is sustainable development. So, and essentially we want to align crypto economics with the goals of sustainable development. And there's a number of great ideas around blockchains, and we have filtered them down to now approximately 15 use cases where we really believe that it can be well aligned, the goals of sustainable development with crypto economics, and one of them being supply chain traceability. And that actually interlinks with a lot of our businesses in a lot of our, let's say, projects all over the world, be it, let's say that we have, from Costa Rica, we have great coffee. It's a carbon neutral coffee, so you can trace basically the carbon footprint of the product and essentially have that certified, and that is a great thing to be tracked and traced all along the supply chain, all the way to the supermarket in Germany and to the customer, who then ideally, eventually, if we blockchain that, you could scan the 2D barcode and then trace it all the way back to the farmer. So that's on the technical side, but that's the role of the private sector essentially to do that, and we would advise them and create the enabling environment for that. But then on the public sector consultancy side of it, this is when it comes to governmental bodies who are involved all along in the supply chain. That could be bodies that issue governmental standards like the European bio label, the organic farming label, or it could be when a good is shipped through the border, like the customs office. That's a governmental body, and if you want to integrate the information of a product, let's say the carbon footprint of a product or human rights aspects of production or other aspects, if once you attach this information using companies like Provenance and others, attach this information to the product, and then you're able to trace it, and then it's interesting, okay, can the tax authority, can the customs office actually distinguish the product based on its production, and then possibly discriminate and say, okay, well, this has a high carbon footprint, so we put an extra tax on top of it. And that's so this type of debates we're looking into. It's a trade law type of debate when it comes to supply chain traceability. And so that's basically our approach to cover the framework conditions of this whole thing. So that's why I'm very excited to have this discussion today, because we want to get together the private sector perspective with research that we're partnering with and with governmental bodies that we are advising on in order to create sustainable solutions.
Look.
It should already be open.
Where is it?
It should already be open somewhere. Yep.
Sorry.
There you go.
Magic. Thanks.
Enter full screen.
Thanks. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, hi. And that one. Cool. Yeah, hi, my name is Max. I'm one of the co-founders of Centrifuge. And it is really weird to talk without getting feedback. But yeah, we'll make it work. And we built, so we're focusing on the financial supply chain, so the financing aspect of sustainability in that context here. I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. So here on the left side myself, a little bit about our background. So this is in the space, in the financing space, if you want, our fourth startup together. So myself, I said already, and Philip is over there, and Martin is hiding somewhere else over there. So yeah, and probably the most notable one is our last company, where a company by the name of Taulia, where we provided supplier financing. Supplier financing means, so we pay small, medium business earlier. Instead of waiting 60, 90 days for their money, we onboarded 1.5 million suppliers that then could enjoy earlier payments instead of waiting that long time. So that was the past. Now let's look at the future. What do you want to do at Centrifuge, which is a fairly new company? It's about 9 months old. We want to tokenize with our operating system, with our blockchain-based protocol, the global spend. Before I explain what that means, maybe I want to explain the size of the opportunity and the issue. Here's a few numbers, and just three numbers I want to point out. 180 trillion, this is roughly the B2B spend. This is how much companies spend each year. How much companies among each other invoice and get paid for. 180 trillion. And in average, companies wait 60 days for their money. 60 days. That means at any given time, so right now, at this moment, 30 trillion US dollars are just laying around somewhere and waiting to be paid. So in return, that means hundreds, thousands, almost a million companies probably waiting at this point in time to be paid, wait for their money, 60 days in average. And 60 days is the European and the US average. If we look a little bit more south, those numbers change dramatically, unfortunately, upwards. All right, so that's the size of the issue, I think. And what do we do at Centrifuge? Well, we do the dirty work, we call it, where, I said it before, we want to tokenize the global spend, meaning we want to make invoices, let's be practical. We want to make invoices, put them on chain, make them verifiable, tradable, exchangeable, making them liquid. That's what we want to do. How do we do that? By connecting businesses, small and large, to exchange data, and then allow third parties to build financial services on top. Financial services like lending, factoring. Factoring is like buying an invoice, and then advancing money for it. So this is what we're up to. And yeah, one of the results of that will be that we build a global decentralized graph of companies who do business with each other. So who owes whom money at what point in time, which in return we hope, we think, we're pretty sure, enable new services. Let me swip over that. Just 1 minute on that slide here. So as I said before, we are in that financing business or factoring business for a while now. And one of the things that we realized that every fintech, and we've been one of them, every fintech starts with great ambitions of financing all suppliers or helping small, medium businesses. That's how you start, because it feels right. But once you realize that actually to onboard a large corporation with 150 million in revenue is the same effort in terms of KYC, onboarding, due diligence and everything, as onboarding Lisa's Pizza joint with 3 invoices a month and a few $100s. As a fintech that is money-oriented, you obviously focus then on the larger guys, and that is not that different with our previous company. So the long tail, if you look at as a supply chain, the long tail of suppliers, the small and medium businesses, are often left out. That's what we want to change. And then, Lisa, you just described the supply chain, I think in Malaysia. Exactly, the condom one where there's two parties in between before we go to the rubber. So I mean, that's a deep supply chain from a supplier, buys from a supplier, buys from a supplier. And so one of the goals that we have, one of the applications of our protocol, of our operating system, is to build a deep tier financing solution where the credit risk, the creditworthiness, the liquidity of a larger corporation can be transferred down the chain to the small, medium business. All right, that's all I got. Thank you.
Cool, great. Well, thank you all for explaining. I think that, given the audience and also the average age, it's pretty clear that sustainability is going to be one of the main themes in the future for businesses, and we're seeing some really kind of pioneering businesses like Einhorn take advantage of that or kind of leverage that just to make things right, both in how they treat the planet, how they treat suppliers and employees and everyone else in the world, really. So I think it would be good to start with you, Lisa, about kind of understanding how much that is felt in the market as a need. How much do you think that companies that really care about sustainability and they actually apply that with or without blockchain, we'll maybe see that on later, they really can have an advantage, and how you've seen that play out for your company?
It's a difficult question because we combine sustainability with fun and good marketing, because we sometimes also see that sustainability is also like a lot of the times branded like very green and or like the coffee which doesn't taste good. So we want to do a good product, and it is of course sustainable. So and it's very hard for us to actually say if the customer buy us because they like the packaging and it's fun and it's with a lot of jokes, or because of the sustainability. But I think what we see is that people actually really trust us. And I think a lot of this comes because we don't tell bullshit. So on our webpage, you can really see, because I mean, in the beginning we really had the decision to make, okay, there's no organic or fair trade. So what do we do? I mean, we can't wait to build all this up because we don't have the money and then sell the product. So we have to sell the product and then do it. And so on the very beginning, our webpage was like, okay, we are not sustainable here, we're not sustainable here, and we're not sustainable here, but this is our vision, which was pretty hard communication in the beginning. And till now, I mean, of course, we have like the first, it's organic now, the people get a fair price, but still we want to move forward and there's still a lot to do. And so people can check this, and we take the people on the journey, and also we take the people on the journey with Instagram, for example. So we know all the people in our supply chain by name. So it's Mr. Tan from the plantation, it's Mr. Lee Latex from the processor, and we can show this. And so we have a personal connection, so it goes way beyond certification, which is the standard in organic or in the green market. But we know our suppliers, we know also the difficulties, and it's not sometimes it's of course about money, but a lot of times it's not about money, and it's just like, okay, we work together and make this happen. So, and I think this is what people actually see when they buy us, because we can do a totally different marketing than Nestle or the big guys, which are like, okay, we don't know anything, and I don't think that they know a single supplier by name and not further deep down.
Yeah. Big black box. And so on that point, I think, Jesse, you instead are trying to enable that for the large guys. And do you think that you will be able to kind of give this visibility and traceability to the big guys, or do you think that, you know, having kind of a real connection between the company and the suppliers is the most important thing?
So yeah, I suppose one thing to clarify is Provenance isn't just doing this for the big guys. We also have 600 small businesses that are on the Provenance platform. I think we wanted to work with big brands as well, because I mean, there's lots of brands that will never work with us, I think, because they'll never want to be transparent, and that's okay.
Right.
But there are lots of businesses that recognize there is a demand for transparency. And they're the ones that usually become our clients. And for me, it was really about scale of impact and being a small startup. How can you make impact quickly? It's a lot harder work to go and get 1,000 small businesses than it is to get one big one and all of their suppliers and what that could influence. So we made the decision from the get-go to make the platform accessible for smaller businesses, but also try and catch some big fish and see if we can make some big fish properly transparent. I don't know. So I've been looking at transparency and working on this for quite a while. I've never made a product though, so I've only ever helped make products transparent. And it's a really interesting time, because I think you've got consumers that are demanding it more, but they're maybe not that unified, right? Like everyone's kind of just buying what they can with the information they've got at the time. And we've got lots of fantastic small businesses like you guys who are doing the right thing and being more open, but we do still have these ginormous companies that maybe less than the condom market, but certainly the food market still control like 95% of everything we eat. And I think for me, that's why I find blockchain technology exciting, because if we allow those big companies to open up data on their own terms using centralized systems that they control, then I don't think transparency will be very meaningful and probably won't fuel the change that hopefully lots of us are trying to see.
Got it. And on that point, let's dig a bit deeper into how it actually works and why blockchain, right? And a lot of people are here for that. On the blockchain, you can obviously write, you know, whatever you want, right? So how do you instead enable kind of like the trust as a consumer that, you know, whatever is written on Provenance is the actual supply chain, and how does it actually technically work?
Yeah, so Provenance started quite a while ago. We've gone through quite a few different like evolutions, and it's been a really interesting journey to try and solve the transparency problem. And also, I still think blockchain technology is very nascent. And although everyone promises it's going to change the world, and I do agree, it's not going to change the world right this minute. Yep. So Provenance at the moment, and actually where we started was, can we track a product through a supply chain on a blockchain? And I'll explain why we started there. And that's because we saw lots of fantastic initiatives in the sustainability space. So I'm sure we all buy into things like fair trade or organic, and those certifications, are great, and they require someone to come and inspect the data and see what's going on. And for the time being, that is the way things are done. And maybe other technologies like sensors or AI or whatever might help us make better decisions on the ground at the smallholder level. But for the time being, it's those certifications. But the big issue is those certifications are fantastic and manage to verify, yes, this farm is organic, but those tomatoes traveling down that supply chain getting multiplied. And so are we all really buying organic supply chains? And even if we are, the method of policing the chain of custody is time intensive, and it is adding a huge cost to becoming certified to this smallholder tomato farmer at the beginning of the chain. So why I think blockchain technology is interesting is the idea of being able to remove a copy-paste function, essentially, and be able to issue an asset on-chain that can then be transferred in ownership through the supply chain without the need for such vigorous chain of custody policing end-to-end. But this only really works if you've got something to protect, right? Like an initial organic stamp or something like that. If you don't, then you're just making a tomato token for fun, which could be fun.
Sure.
Worked with kittens.
I'm sure it will happen.
So I mean, that's kind of where we started, and we've kind of moved on a lot from that, and are also doing a lot of new thinking in how we can evolve from the tracking of products thing, which is now proliferated to lots of applications and lots of startups that are doing that now. And a lot of our work currently is going beyond the tracking and looking more at the claim itself, like how can you triangulate the data in a way and store that data in a way that's got more of an authority, but also looking at incentives to make a claim that's correct. Because a big issue with the audit process, someone coming out to an organic farm and checking that you are organic, is the cost of that is still going to be way too high, and certified products are still in the 1 or 2 percentile globally. So if you're going to get that to 10% and you want to make it work in a developing world, you can't send them out with a clipboard. So a lot of what we're looking at is, if we can use token economics or new kinds of methods in order to be able to help incentivize not lying about whether your farm is organic or not. So you don't need a man with a clipboard.
Got it. Cool. And around the fair trade and organic certifications, I wanted to ask Franz, do you see the government's role expanding around that? Do you see it requiring maybe in the future some sustainability tracing, or you were saying at the border discriminating against products that maybe have used child labor or have particularly unfair supply chains, and maybe what you guys are doing around this?
So it's super important to have awareness among consumers and have this traceability from consumers. That's one of the driving forces for sustainability. Typically it's bought in rich countries and produced in poorer countries. But that's typically it's relatively well-off people, academics, and so on. Maybe it's 10% of the population. Maybe of Berlin-Kreuzberg, it's 50%. But essentially, you're addressing a relatively small share of the market of those who would really rather buy the thing that has a certain certificate on its product than not. There's other leverages that you have in your hands, and that is trade policy. That is national regulations in the actual country of production. So there's a lot of our projects that focus on labor standards and things like that in the countries of production. And there often the leverage that we have is, for instance, that the European trade policy negotiation will require the partner country to fulfill a certain standard and actually not only fulfill it on paper, but enforce it in order to get customs free access to the European Union. So there are a number of different forces that can encourage and incentivize sustainability. And now the blockchain is particularly well suited for the type of incentive that is attached to the product itself. Because you can make products much more traceable. You can avoid, as you mentioned, the all of a sudden that maybe double the amount of the product is being sold as certified than it is produced. So that there's a great added value to that. And what I'm kind of envisioning or secretly hoping is that the actual trade policy will become the new leverage. Because these days a lot of governments, including people and so on, are questioning the current trade regime we have with the World Trade Organization, and a lot of the trade deals are being changed and amended and dissolved and not complied with. And maybe at some point we will have a different sort of regime that will be allowing a much more tailored trade policy that will maybe take into account the carbon footprint or the human rights footprint or the whatever footprint of the product. It's probably will start with those things that are easy to measure and easy to measure reliably, and also easy to label reliably. And I think this is where blockchain adds the greatest value. That's probably one of the reasons why Everledger was so successful in labeling diamonds, because diamonds you can identify individually by its crystal structure, and there's no way to change that. So with fruits or vegetables, there's much more ways you have to tamper in order to tamper the labeling if you want. So that's the tricky part. I mean, when we look at wood, we have discussed with our colleagues for the wood supply chain. There are approaches to label the wood according with a DNA sample or with some certain other properties. So there's a number of ways how you can identify the origin of certain products, and that is really key if you want to have a reliable supply chain traceability on the blockchain.
Got it. I would ask again, Eliza, about you've said that you were working, with many different maybe farmers or suppliers all around the world, and they might be small. And as Max was saying, there's $30 trillion locked in payments around the world right now, right? So have you ever encountered that in your own supply chain, and how have you tried to make your supply chain kind of more financially inclusive, maybe?
Yeah, so this is especially, for rubber, it was a little different, but seeing now the cotton supply chain for the pads and the tampons, it is really an issue because it's mostly smallholders. And I mean, we found a partner, like a cotton supplier, which we will now take into our value chain, which is, I think from a sustainability point of view, like the most, my sustainability heart is really beating, and they're really, really great, because what they do is they buy, or like normally in the market, it is like, okay, somewhere here is the production, or we press a production button, and then it goes down the value chain, and then you either get like from 10 or 10,000 farmers the amount you need to fulfill the production, so the market demand. And what they're doing is they give the farmers a guarantee to buy all the cotton to a premium price. And so what actually they have, like their difficulty is that in some years they have way too much cotton, and then they have to, normally they do textiles. So they have to do more textiles and bring it into the market. Or in some years they have too little cotton, and then they have to go down with the supply of the textiles. And this is, I think, very, very unique also in a sustainability sphere. But still, even though the farmers get the guarantee and they get a 15% premium, sometimes because they have financial, they're very, very limited. So sometimes, even though they have the guarantee, they decide to sell it for less price before, because they just want the cash right now and can't wait for the other 3 to 4 weeks. So this is it's very, very difficult for the farmers to actually be in this whole supply chain.
Got it. And Max, how do you think Centrifuge can tie into those problems and help out in creating more sustainable supply chains?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, it's the sustainability on financing what we address, and obviously a sustainable supply chains, the physical ones, are one component of it. But when we focus on really the financing aspects, well, it's one important piece for those suppliers is to get financing at all in general, which they don't, many of them. So that's where we want to help by using our protocol, by making them own their own reputation, their customer relationships, and then seek financing from the providers, from the local ones, but provable, verifiable. That's pretty important. And the second piece is, since you have then of a transaction, let's say an invoice that is sent from A to B, from Einhorn to the supplier, maybe the middleman or directly, you have a provable, verifiable again, representation of the invoice, where you can actually see that is a valid invoice, that is a valid purchase order, or whatever it is, and then finance against that. It's not just a piece of paper, it's real, it's verified, it's guaranteed. And that makes it cheaper, because it's verifiable, less risk, cheaper, more affordable. I think those are some of the components where we hope we can help.
And it meshes up pretty well with what Provenance and other companies like that do, right? Because now you're going to have the ability to tie into even more data about, what that invoice kind of is and where all the things come from, right? You see yourselves kind of integrating with similar platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer it first, and maybe you add a little bit more. So from our perspective, getting data on tracking, like knowing where certain goods are, that's one component. But knowing as well that goods and services are performed and produced in a sustainable way is something that is part of the reputation of a business then. And there are organizations out there that then make lending or financial services more affordable. So that's where I think a nice cycle happens.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I don't know if this is proven, but I feel like sustainable supply chains seem inherently less risky financially as well, not just inherently less risky to the business upstream buying product. So it seems quite natural to me that if you're using an intelligent system to track the sustainability credentials of an ingredient, say, and you can prove that ingredient is in this product, that's this business, I don't see why using a system like Centrifuge as well with the invoices, you couldn't try and calibrate the two together to make sustainability part of the equation of access to finance or rates or how quickly you can gain access.
Got it. Super interesting. I started a company in the supply chain space, so I could ask questions all night long. But I would like to see if someone from the audience has some questions, maybe working on something in the space and wants to.
Question, you get a package of condoms.
Oh well, that's great.
It's just 10 good questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll go pass them around. We have one there.
Yeah, I have a question for Provenance. The classic problem.
Oh, you're right.
The classic problem that every blockchain platform has is, sorry my language, but shit in, shit out. So if the data that you put on chain from the beginning is not accurate, then you can have the best tracking system in the world. It's going to come out not accurate at the end. How do you guys tackle that? You talked about token economics and trying to think about incentives. Do you have any other I don't know, ideas or what are you guys doing about that?
Fair question. You get the condoms.
Good luck with those. Yeah, no, totally. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you're in a blockchain crowd, it's really tempting to just get like really out there and be like, yeah, when this is all tokenized and blockchains are everywhere, like how's it all going to work? But when you're in the supply chain crowd, you get back to reality and you realize most supply chains aren't even digital. So, like we've got a long way to go before this is all driven by a token that smallholders hold. But anyway, not to say that we can't get there, because I believe we can. So for the time being, there's quite a bit of low-hanging fruit on the shit in, shit out thing. So one is the certifiers themselves and NGOs that are on the ground and doing amazing work, and already millions and millions has been invested into that. So if we can help make their work retain value and not get fraudulently substituted along the supply chain, that adds quite a large amount of value to the smallholder already. And yeah, you can't guarantee with a certification or an NGO that won't be shit, but you've got a good chance of, there's also interesting ways in which you can add reputation as well around the individuals that are being certified and potentially the certifier as well. So that's, for me, that's the sort of low-hanging fruit in reality in supply chains is collaboration and working with the people that are already grabbing that data. I mean, a big thing that we're doing as well is trying to kind of build a system for sort of triangulating data sets. So it's not just like one person says this farm is a smallholder, female owned, but you could also bring in other data sets, like even things like Instagram. Like, why can't someone with an Instagram account come and take a picture of the farm, and starting to build up more of a picture. And I feel like that for me gets it to the next level. And then I think there's some exciting things coming in the future where you could think about incentive mechanisms for trying to prevent fraud or retain reputation, I guess, in the network. But I think the reality of where a lot of supply chains are and also who we're trying to help, which is mostly developing world based smallholder farmers, we've got some technology to build.
A pure blockchain person would say you're centralizing therefore the whole process, because if the data that comes in has to be verified by an NGO, then the whole supply chain depends on whether the NGO is trusted or not.
But that doesn't mean the system's still centralized. But the proof is centralized. I agree. Yeah, the proof is still centralized. True. But to get to a decentralized tracking mechanism with fully decentralized proof is going to take a few steps, I believe.
So maybe I'll add another low-hanging fruit as of data sources which are more or less reliable is typically the shipments that come across borders. They are specified in terms of quantity. So if you have that as being part of your supply chain, that is a relatively reliable data that you can rely on in the end to ensure that the products not all of a sudden multiply. I mean, of course, if they pretend to be certified in some way and that information is fraudulent, at least you will make sure that there's only 1 ton of fraudulent thing and that doesn't get multiplied. So at least this one fraud of multiplying certified products that you can prevent relatively well. And then maybe looking into the future, we currently have a research call open at Blockchain Lab, which is looking at essentially sensor data and other data sources. Looking at we're looking for universities to basically look at sensor measured sustainability. That could be aerial imagery, where you can look at deforestation. That could be other sort of social media mining or whatever other sensors that could then act as an oracle to track to trigger your smart contracts. So in that sense, that would be additional data sources for reliability. So I don't know yet to what degree that will solve the problem, but at least we're open to suggestions from the academic world.
There was one there. Here you go.
Hi, a question for Centrifuge. I mean, how do you see the role of mobile money, mobile wallets, cryptocurrencies for the payment of those invoices? I mean,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the question is around the payment of those invoices. When there's the general payment of it, like, okay, you owe the money, you pay, and there's the early payment. So if a third party jumps in and pays the invoice early, advances money. The reality in our world, like like Europe, US, and North America, I think that right now there's a strong preference to get fiat in your bank account because you got to pay your employees with fiat, and I think that's the reality still for a while. So we need those on and off ramps. So the payment actually could happen in a coin. It would be a stable coin. It needs to be a stable coin. It can't be a fluctuating one. But there's on and off ramps needed to get it back into your bank account or on chain in the first place. I think it's slightly different in let's say Africa or Latin America, and we briefly talked about it before, where, well, I mean, most people, or many, what is it? I think 25% is unbanked worldwide, 2 billion people. I think the number is more. Yeah, so in the business world, I don't know the number, how many businesses are actually unbanked, but it's probably a substantial number as well. So, well, no bank account, I don't need an on and off ramp from fiat into crypto. I might be perfectly fine to hold and pay and transfer money, get paid in crypto. So I see actually a pretty big opportunity to skip that step, and that problem that is solved for our world here of on and off ramp doesn't apply in other countries. And then I have my mobile wallet that holds crypto instead of M-Pesa, where I'm holding my telephone money.
You go ahead. You're next.
So I have a question. How do you plan on solving dispute resolution? Because I can see that as being sort of interesting part of a business. Because the bigger the piñata, so to say, for fraudsters, the bigger the incentive, right? So how do you see that being solved?
From a financial supply chain perspective, what we do, or is it more in a so there's a variety of a variety of answers on that. I mean, in a perfect world, if you have a dispute, you only finance an invoice or a transaction that is confirmed by both parties as valid and as accepted, right? Accepted, so I received the goods, services had been performed, all great. If you finance such a transaction, there's a likelihood of dispute is rather low. If you finance earlier, the risk is higher, it's more expensive, but it's doable. So even if before the goods are shipped, you can finance a transaction if you have a proof of of the order, but you don't know if there will be a dispute, so the cost might be higher. So it's a risk game. I think that's what I want to say. It's a more risk. The earlier you do it, the less proof points you have, the expensier it is.
My question is related to the tracking of the products. For example, as you say, with diamond it's like kind of easy because each diamond have different crystal structures, so you can know that actually the one at the end is the same at the beginning. So it is really important, like the nature of the products, and there are some products that you cannot simply track, or how the ecosystem handle this kind of identifying the products. Is it something that has to be solved with blockchain, or maybe it's problem of other ecosystem? How is it important in the supply chain?
You want to take it?
We can.
You can both.
Tag team. So I think this answers the question. So so there's quite a lot of debate about tracking products through the chain and how much you have to connect said product to the blockchain. And there are lots of benefits for a uniquely identified product, because it can contain a uniquely identified ID in a blockchain, and then the two match, and you can check at any point in the chain that you're indeed holding said product. So for a diamond, but also for most natural products, there's a DNA fingerprint of some type. So that physical digital connection can be made through that method, if it's financially viable. So Wagyu beef on the whole. But there's sort of a few different schools of thought here, though, in that if you are trying to prove absolute authenticity, then I think you do need a complete digital physical match, and there has to be a unique way. And of course you could apply a tag as well, right? Like a concealed box with a really complicated tag that's digital and you can't break. But for lots of applications in supply chains, you might just be trying to prove that there was no double spend. Or so, for example, for something like fair trade, do you really care if the exact coffee you're actually drinking was the one that the farmer got paid more money for? Or do you just want to make sure that a farmer got more money because of you? And in those kinds of incidences, I think it's less important to have a digital physical connection, as long as you can prove that the finance is flowing correctly up the chain, or that you have you're not duplicating the impact, so that when you buy the product, you know that impact is correct. And we do quite a lot of work in that domain on products that are difficult to identify perfectly, or not financially viable to do so with DNA or spectral analysis or whatever. And I think that works quite well if you're looking at just an impact proof. And you could abstract that even more in a way, which is like using blockchain tech to also transfer. So something like fair trade, there's no reason why the payment can't be made by the consumer at the end and go all the way back to a farmer somewhere that makes some kind of coffee, and he's still kind of got the same impact, right? It doesn't necessarily need to cascade through the chain. So I think it's the sort of different degrees of physical digital connection.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. I actually, I would add like a different aspect, because of course this is like how business or how the economy is running right now. But if you see it from a sustainability point and seeing it like from the cotton supplier point of view, is really, I mean, they take the financial risk at the beginning, and that's how they can secure that it's like 100% transparent throughout the whole value chain, because it's their cotton and they know, okay, we bought this amount, so this is here, there, and there. So I think, of course, blockchain might be one solution, but it's still, it also depends how much risk you want to take and how much financial money you want to take to actually be sustainable. So I think there are also other solutions.
So I have an electricity company that I buy electricity from, and that is supposedly renewable. But of course, I use the same electrons as my neighbor who is not having renewable. So there's also the quota system, but it's the impact that counts. However, with organic farming, it's different. You want to have a product that doesn't contain pesticides, so you want to make sure that it's really that product that is labeled. And it's in the end an economic question of how much does it cost to label the products, and how much does the checking cost, and how much and how great is the risk of fraud in that case. And so it really depends. So the best case for product labeling is when you have very durable and very expensive products. So that's why diamond is a good case for taking that effort. But if you have tomatoes, you might just choose a different, a much cheaper option.
You're next.
What still came to my mind is the question how revenue is split up between different parties in the supply chain. And you mentioned that already a little bit, but aren't cryptocurrencies the perfect way to actually track that? Because I can prove how much funds or how much of the revenue, which share is paid to each party. And isn't that for me, if I talk about fair trade, one of the most important things that I know the people that produce the product get a fair cut? And the second question goes to Victor, I think it's connected. Isn't that also the problem of the whole development aid, that I don't know where my funds end, how much of the funds that I give to a development aid organization ends up at the people that really need it? And isn't blockchain and cryptocurrency the perfect solution to make it trackable? How much of the funds go to which party and what they're actually used for? Thank you.
Thank you. You get this. Do you have anyone you prefer?
The first bit?
Yeah.
I'll do the
I
first
think
bit.
the first one, yeah.
First bit, answer is yes. But do businesses want to make their financials transparent? Probably not. I agree. I completely agree. I'm with you. Yes. Unfortunately, yes, revealing margins is still a relatively novel idea. And, well, there's a lot of debate around fair trade, and a lot of people don't actually think fair trade is really fair, because it's not transparent exactly how much money gets back to what farmer where and what's happening in the middle of the supply chain. And yeah, blockchains could completely sort of combo of finance plus product traceability on a blockchain. You could, in theory, see absolutely perfect financial transparency back to the farmer, which would be super cool. Yeah, which would be amazing. But the big issue is the businesses in the middle who don't necessarily want to make that information fully transparent. But yeah, no, I mean, but this is where we need more people to demand transparency.
Yeah, you're mentioning actually one of our different use cases, which is tracking public finance. So there is a good reason why a citizen would want to know on what governments are spending their money. And that includes aid budgets, but it of course includes as well national budgets. And there is a tendency that aid budgets have much more scrutiny mechanisms than national budgets typically. So in that sense, there's a huge amount of accountability mechanisms. And indeed, donor organizations, especially financing organizations like the Asian Development Bank, like the KfW and so on, they are looking into these options of tracking and tracing the whole budgetary allocation. and expenditure. And let's say the tricky part is at some point you will lose trace. Maybe you can follow the first step, maybe the second step, maybe the third if you're lucky, and at some point it will trickle down to being so small amounts when in the end something is bought on the local market with that money, you will lose track because not everything is connected to the internet, not everything is traceable on the blockchain. But yes, it does make a lot of sense on this institutional level. The larger the institutions are you deal with, like a large construction company and so on, so that makes a lot of sense to actually track and trace governmental expenditure. It's not always part of the political economy of each and every country we have in the world, but definitely democracies have a tendency to citizen demanding that sort of scrutiny. And we somehow that's always part of the agenda of development organizations to make that happen and to push in that direction. At the same time, we need to respect national sovereignty and partner governments regarding their national budgets. But sometimes, especially, and that's what I'm looking for, is actually to develop a sort of pilot case of, sometimes a new leader gets elected, and that new leader gets elected because he's campaigning against corruption, and then saying, okay, I'm going to clean up the health budgets. And then that opportunity I would like to leverage and say, okay, now we give you governmental advice on how to track and trace the entire public expenditure of the Ministry of Health. So this is the type of projects I would be looking for in that context.
My question would be more for Provenance. I read that about the fish example that you put it on your website, and I was pretty impressed by the work that you did. My question is that was relatively quite simple example, but if I am dealing with something more complex, as in this television, which involves 1,000 different parts which are having metals mined at different locations geographically, how do you manage that level of complexity and make it in one single entity that the customer can actually say that everything was working fine and that I was not somehow related to a child labor or something like that? And also the privacy part, wherein there is this dilemma of make or buy. So if I know certain depth of the supply chain, and if I know the entities which are dealing with certain things, then I can always go around and cut the middleman. So that is it like a big issue, and how would you deal with that?
Yeah, I think our project in Fish, for those of you that haven't seen it, which probably most of you, it's at provenance.org/tuna. There's a very comprehensive, very long report, which was a project that we did that was, I guess it was one of the first international pilots of using blockchain tech in a supply chain. We worked with an NGO on the ground and tracked the product through the chain. But yeah, I agree. It was just a fish and it turned into mostly sashimi, so chopped up fish. Not that hard, but it was insanely hard. The complexity of supply chains is absolutely unreal. And I think we've learned the hard way that tracking every single product is not the quickest way, for sure. But I still think there is legs there. It's the tricky thing is that with something like a television, it's not just that you've got lots and lots of components. It's the fact that the supply chain can be very dynamic because your cobalt and your lithium or whatever could be coming from so many different locations all around the world, and that could be changing almost on a daily shipment intake. So in order to really track every single element inside a TV, you need to track every single lithium mine, like times 1,500 different mines of different rare earths, for example. And that's really difficult unless you get into trying to find really niche cases. So like this particular type of element that's mined in Sweden with these criterias. And then you do have a chance at tracking all of that thing. But then you've got the issue in that might go into like 1,000 different types of TV. So there's a issue here, and it's why we focus a lot on very, very simple products that are and working with companies that are expressly trying to help at the early stage of the supply chain, because they're much less dynamic. And if they are dynamic, it's mainly just extra smallholder farmers being added on to the production at the early stage. So that's kind of one way in which we're sort of like trying to mitigate against the trying to do this for a television risk. But yeah, doing this for TV is going to be hard and take some time. Yeah, the make or buy thing's super interesting. So lots of the smaller businesses we work with are quite happy to be quite transparent. Like they share quite a bit of information, but the vast majority of larger businesses and, well, the vast majority of businesses do not want to be fully transparent. So doing everything fully publicly on Ethereum or something like that is a pipe dream in the near term. But that's why we're interested in lots of new innovation going on in blockchain that can help prove certain things off-chain, but still carry the transaction in a immutable format through the chain. And that can help protect the supply chain, but ensure the integrity. So it could be that you just don't reveal who your maker's maker is, and therefore you can't see exactly what they're doing. But yeah, as things do get more transparent, I think supply chains will change. I mean, I think they will change from being supply chains to demand networks anyway. And I don't think I feel like middlemen will have a tougher time, I predict.
Anyone, if I can't see you in the back, just call me out.
It's also more a question to the physical supply chain. I think you mentioned great use cases where blockchain is used as being an audit log, an audit trail for tracing products and so on, and actually having this shit in, shit out issue that you trust on someone certifying that what it is. If you ever thought about something like a token economy where you establish something in itself, a decentralized economy, actually making sure that someone is participating, has someone to put on stake and actually get either rewarded or penalty if they do something right or wrong?
Yeah, definitely. And that's sort of what I was hinting at with the first question. In that, yeah, the current method of auditing and verifying whether something is sustainable or meets a certain sustainability criteria at the moment is very, very inefficient. And yeah, I think it's a really perfect scenario for applying some kind of token or market economics to try and dissuade bad actors or fraud at the beginning of the supply chain, which would then link the whole thing together. The only issue is this is just still quite academic, because it's complicated to even build something like that today, but also it's getting the incentive mechanisms right, and the adoption is so difficult to do in the supply chains that you want to help the most. So it's just trying to kind of have that in mind as we grow and work inclusively with more and more kind of systems where people are deploying mobile phones into supply chains and things like that, where this could become possible. But for the time being, that's still relatively few supply chains. But absolutely, definitely, I think that is like an amazing way in which we can help create accountability in supply chains in a far more fluid way. Yeah, agreed.
You're right after him.
It's a question for Centrifuge. How do you deal with credit risk? Do you provide credit risk assessment of the counterparties, or?
Wait.
Hey, hi. So yeah, we're just the rails. We just provide the connectivity between the counterparties, the buyer, the supplier, and then third parties built on top. So third parties, like, I mean, it could be a bank. Let's start with that. Very traditional, very old school. And they assess the credit risk. It could be a fintech, to go one more level advanced. Or best case, it could be a completely decentralized exchange. Think of a 0x or a Dharma. But the underwriting, the risk assessment is part of their job. So that's the DApps or the apps on our operating system take care of that.
So I have a feeling like most of the time you talk about bottom-up approach and supply chain and transparency from starting from small organizations and going up to the bigger organizations. But what if you have a top-down approach and talk about a big, massive marketplace, or looking from the governmental perspective? So you have the policymakers, the lawmakers, they're saying this is now the law and you have to comply. And therefore you don't need to start with the small organizations, but then the larger organizations has to comply. This is simply the law. Could this be simply an easier approach, and then you can possibly have everyone simply complying with it, whether they want it or not, because you have to comply, and then all the parties are benefiting at the end?
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely it's a very effective measure to just create rules. There has to be political consensus for that, and I mentioned that some of the incentives that rich countries can give to producing countries by lowering taxes and trade, or setting certain technical standards you can do as well. Of course, it's all a question of consensus, but let's say the added value that that blockchain traceability brings to the game is biggest when you attach this product property or production property to the product itself. So, I mean, for that general policy thing, you don't need a blockchain. But yeah, great. It's happening, and that's what we're doing also. But then back to what are the major forces if you say maybe large companies, because most of the markets in the world are buyer's market. That means basically the latest, the company, the label, whatever it is, Unilever and the large Metro for food stuff in Germany and Europe. They have a great calling power, and they could basically define the standards that need to be complied with throughout their supply chain. There's very few markets where it's actually a seller's market. If the product is very rare, then the calling power is on the producer side. But usually it's the large buyers. So that will be the largest leverage essentially. If possibly consumers are pushing these large buyers to shift towards endorsing certain standards throughout their supply chain.
You first, please.
But I also think I worked in the textile industry before, and I think there's just the tendency. I mean, they want to have big margins. So if Bangladesh goes too high in the cost, they're now all switching to Ethiopia. So it's, of course, you can make rules, but I mean, then we don't have a level playing field. And there's still cheaper countries and poorer countries which will always be able to produce like to lower costs. And so, and if you don't have the transparency, or you don't really know like the value chain, then yeah, I think nothing will really change, because you will always go for the cheapest.
Yeah, I quite disagree that actually a law or a regulation will make it happen. I mean, if you there is for quite some years, and Martin helped me, the prompt payment code in Europe. So it's a guidance that every country, every member state should implement. You need to pay in 30 days in general. In 30 days you got to pay. How does it come that we're still waiting 59 days in average for the money? So even if there's a law implemented by most countries, it's still 59 days, so twice as long as the law predicts. There's always loopholes, there's always exceptions, or there's always other countries where I don't have to pay in 30 days. Anyway, so yeah, I think it got to come from the market in that case, incentive.
I should maybe add one point, that the current global trade regime we have basically doesn't allow you to discriminate products based on their production methods. So essentially, when you import a product according to the WTO law, you're not allowed to distinguish that product based on its production methods. So essentially, you cannot control whether this is produced in that one way or another. However, you have other mechanisms of let's say, the German companies. They are responsible for the human rights along the supply chain of their products. So basically, they're not allowed to support certain type of, whether it's child labor or other forms. So it uses this mechanism of forcing, in this case, companies in rich countries to exert control over the supply chain.
So for Centrifuge, how are you guys different from Ripple, Stellar, even Ethereum?
Yeah, look, I mean, let's take Ripple. Ripple, I know a little bit. So Ripple is about moving money, is replacing SWIFT. So that's their stated goal, right? To move money between banks or corporates to the banks. What we actually care about is the financial supply chain, as I described before, the documents, the invoices that are exchanged, the purchase orders. In theory, actually, Ripple or XRP, I guess in that case, or Lumen could be a payment coin in our network where companies are paid with that coin. But Ripple nor Stellar are doing anything in financing. Did that answer, or well, we build on Ethereum. So Ethereum is the platform we built our protocol on top. So Ethereum is a very generic world computer. So we're just focusing on one specific use case.
And you have the CTO around, you can ask later.
Cool, thanks. Question also to Max. So I totally get that you can enable efficiency by using, smart contracts and blockchain technology. But as you just said before, there are laws that should force companies to pay within 30 days. But the reality is it's not like that. So my question there is, yes, you can enable efficiency in lending and other stuff. But this huge problem you mentioned a couple of times of this discrepancy, how can you change that? Because if laws can't change it, how can technology change it? Because if the buyer is so strong, it just doesn't care, and he's strong enough to select his suppliers in a way to just force it up on him, how are you going to change that with technology? Thanks.
And I'm sure Jesse has something to say on that as well, but I'll start real quick. So we want to make it actually that the supplier, the small, medium guys actually control their own fate. So even if someone wants to pay 60, 90, 120 days, that I have that provable, we call it reputation, that I have that business relationship. Yes, I got to wait 90 days in theory, but I can prove that I get my money in 90 days, and I can actually seek then financial services, a factoring, an advance, a loan for extremely low rates because it's provable and verifiable, which is not today. So that is our approach, to make it actually possible for those companies to seek on their own, to not rely on the large corporation, except for the data from the large corporation.
And Pete says here, so we're going to get probably the last few questions and then 1, 2, 3.
At the GIZ Blockchain Lab, we've also been talking to Zalando and Fashion for Good, and lots of companies in the apparel industry have told us that one of the problems they're facing is that they don't have access to each other's supply chains, that there's lacking interoperability, that there's lacking transparency for cooperation between the different companies. Maybe a question for Provenance, but also for Centrifuge, if you have something to say on that topic. Do you also see, at least for the companies you are working with at Provenance, that they can also work better with each other and cooperate better with each other, and then maybe even create more sustainable, transparent supply chains?
Yeah, this is a really good question, because I think this is kind of the crux to blockchain success. I think in supply chain will be the interoperability, let's all play on the same system question. And it's kind of where blockchains make the most sense to try and create a system where everyone can play together that isn't owned by some, I mean, goodness knows what that would be, that organization that would control all of the supply chains. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing some collaboration, I'd say pretty limited to date. I think most businesses that work with us, it's out of their own kind of, I want to differentiate my brand by being more transparent, and they try and engage up the chain, and how far can you really get? It's small companies, sure, you can get right to the beginning of the chain often, but with larger companies it's way more complicated, and I think we're a long way away from it being just one strain of the supply chain and it being very interoperable and everyone kind of playing in the same way. I think there's a huge amount of work to do. I mean, not just for us. I mean, there's lots of companies in the blockchain supply chain space. A lot of collaborative work that needs to happen on setting standards and trying to help work out how we can all play together and use blockchains as a way for us to share that data. I mean, that's why we chose to build on Ethereum, because we felt like it was seemed like the best backbone for creating a shared system. But there's still, a lack of things like product standards for an individual asset, for example. Like no one's quite yet come up with a way of exactly representing that on a blockchain. So until that happens, I don't think there'll be as much sharing. But then also there's the issue of businesses not wanting to share anyway. So a lot of stuff needing to be proven off chain, which is still a huge area of development for the Ethereum community. So until that's cracked as well, I think particularly in fashion supply chains where it's quite cutthroat and people don't want to share too much, and what's being made and also who's making it. I think that those two things really need to be sorted out before that's really going to work.
Yeah, maybe I get another question.
Yeah.
Get the pizza.
Yeah. Someone's hungry.
Sorry. I was inspired by what you said earlier on, that I thought it was interesting. You came forward and very courageously chose to, be transparent, even in the areas where you were not sustainable in the very beginning. And you also pointed out that this was quite hard to communicate being a business. And then it hit me like Volkswagen. They have a similar situation, right? They have to communicate to people, that they intend to go green and they intend to become electric driven by, I believe it's 2030. And do you have any advice to like kind of big corporations like these guys, what to do in this situation?
Easy last question, right?
I will advise, Fabi. Not just because of blockchain, but I think trust issues, or it's so easy today to check in the internet and check like what is behind the brand, and also who buys this? Oh, we're going green. It's just like you have to tell stories that people actually believe, and to have these stories, you actually need to know a little bit about your supply chain, or tell the people also the difficulties, because it's super, super hard, not actually that expensive, but it's super hard to build a green supply chain, because if you get like resources or commodities from the global south, now Africa or Asia, it's not that you do one thing and then it's green. It's like green is a little easier than this whole social issues like child labor. It's like it's very, very hard. So I think there are a lot of stories. If you really want to change something, you have to do it, but it's not that expensive actually. But it's work, and you have to ask questions.
Thanks. So we'll keep it, because there's a long line of questions. So but they're gonna stick around. But just before we say goodbye, have you guys in your work, what you've done, and when you dug deep into the supply chains, what is it that's missing that if you weren't doing what you're doing now, you would want to build, or if you want someone else to build? Maybe people in the audience that want to be entrepreneurs or thinking about their next thing, they could kind of take inspiration from that.
I would want personally, as a citizen and consumer, I would want to have a user interface that's basically super comfortable, and that would allow me to say, let's say, okay, my shopping agent or whatever would ensure that my life is carbon neutral, and it would basically take all the necessary steps and using all the information tracked on Provenance and others to ensure that my life is carbon neutral.
Yeah, I would want a lot more trustworthy products where I really believe, okay, the fair trade money or the organic money is really changing something. And I think there are so many products we can go with. So.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with both of those things. Yeah, I also think, I mean, I think there's still a lot of stuff to build. Like we've talked a bit about like using certifications and things like that as a way to prove if something's sustainable or not. But there's so many opportunities with things like sensors, crowdsourced data, AI, looking at satellites, that kind of stuff to help prove certain aspects of sustainability and trying to calibrate impact like for real. And I think that is that's probably what I'd do.
Nice.
Yeah, since half of our engineering team is here, so I mean, the usual that anyone in blockchain or crypto says is the usability or the UX, the UI problem right now. I mean, that shit nobody can use right now. So that needs to change within the next month and years.
Cool. All right, well, a big round of applause. And yeah, thanks again to Maya and the Centrifuge team for organizing, Blue Yard for pizza, drinks, and the place. And go have fun.
Thank you. Danke. Dankeschön.
Ja, Dankeschön.
Danke dir, ja.
It was actually
short. Hey, Jesse, thanks.
Thank you.
Minute, okay?
That was great. Yeah, definitely. I'm sticking.
You came through it. Yeah, you came through it.